I saw the credit card bill. La Petite Maison? $412?
Must have been a mistake.
On the day you said you were at the Phoenix conference?
I think we need to talk.
No one ever warns you that betrayal doesn't always crash down like thunder on a clear sky. Sometimes it slips in quietly like a cold mist, seeping into every crack of the trust you placed in someone you love. For Jessica Wallace, a 42-year-old businesswoman living in Manhattan, the first sign wasn't a red lipstick stain on a collar or the scent of unfamiliar perfume on her husband's jacket. It began with an email from American Express at 7:16 a.m. on a Tuesday, just a transaction notification, but the amount, $412 at a restaurant they had only visited once, 3 years ago, happened to fall exactly on the night her husband, Andrew Wallace, claimed he was attending a conference in Arizona. That was the moment her business instincts kicked in. Jessica wasn't the dramatic type. She didn't flip a table, didn't scream, didn't throw a wine glass like women on Netflix dramas. She did what she was best at, analyzing data. She knew this feeling well, that cold shiver down the spine, her mind like a blank whiteboard filling with variables to verify. In business, Jessica called it the gut trigger moment, the instant your instincts scream something is off. And this time, the intuition wasn't about a deal. It was about the 15-year marriage she thought she could trust. The truth was, Jessica used to idolize her husband. Andrew, the deep-voiced man with salt and pepper hair and the confident gaze of someone who knew his own worth, had once been her inspiration, her rock. They had weathered the startup years together, when she'd pawned her wedding ring just to pay her first 3 employees. And now, with Wallace Strategies operating across 3 states, Andrew had stepped back into a supportive role in regional sales, a job title that sounded small, but made for the perfect cover for his mysterious trips. Jessica wasn't naive, but she hadn't thought she'd be betrayed by the man who stood by her through rainy New York nights that chilled to the bone. The pain wasn't just in the physical betrayal. It was in the intellectual insult. Andrew assumed she was too busy to notice the shift in his late nights, the hidden texts behind blurred notifications, the dodging glances when they talked about the future. If there was anything that set Jessica apart, it was that she never let emotions lead the way. She had once told her staff during a training session, "Control the narrative, or the narrative controls you." And now, she knew she needed to control this narrative, not with tears, but with strategy. Jessica began quietly pulling credit card data, travel logs, even location tracking from the shared Tesla. Every data point matched up. Dinner bills, hotel stays, nights in other cities masked by, "I've got meetings, get some rest." She said nothing, didn't pick up the phone, didn't call her best friend to cry. She opened Google Calendar, created a new event, find private investigator. Then she carried on with her workday like normal. She knew, smart women don't react immediately. Smart women collect data. Between pitch deck meetings, she met with a digital surveillance expert. Not a shady guy in sunglasses outside a cafe like in Hollywood films, but a legal hacker, one used by powerful CEOs across New York to vet untrustworthy employees. And now, the one in question was her own husband. Within 8 days, everything became crystal clear. The woman's name was Tessa Morgan, 29 years old, a marketing associate at a midtown ad agency. She dressed fashionably, frequently checked in at brunch spots in Brooklyn, and, according to the report, had gone on business trips with Andrew at least 6 times that year. Jessica read each text message recovered from Andrew's unencrypted iCloud. And what hurt more than the photos or restaurant receipts was how he spoke about her. "Jess only cares about work, always buried in KPIs and deadlines. We barely connect anymore." She became a CEO but forgot how to love. "I'm staying for financial reasons, but you're the one I want to wake up next to every morning." Each line like acid poured over the self-worth of a woman who once thought she had everything. But Jessica didn't crumble. Let them think they're winning. That's how you flip the script. She closed the report, opened her personal laptop, and started a new document. The title read, Phase 1-Data, Phase 2, Strategy, Phase 3, Rebuild. That evening, when Andrew walked through the door and hugged her from behind like nothing was wrong, Jessica simply smiled sweetly. "You're home. I made your favorite." He had no idea that dinner was the beginning of a game where she wrote the rules, Jessica's Cartier watch read 2:37 a.m. when she finished organizing all the investigative data into a folder labeled Glass House. That name wasn't random, because her marriage to Andrew had become exactly that, a glass house, where everything seemed perfect from the outside but, in truth, was more fragile than ever. But Jessica wasn't the kind of woman to pick up the shards and glue them back together with hope. She was the kind who redesigned the entire structure. The next phase of her plan wasn't about discovering the truth anymore. The truth was as clear as sunlight over Fifth Avenue. What Jessica needed now was to establish control, and there was no move more powerful than letting the other woman step into her territory, legally, publicly, and on payroll. The next morning, while the marketing team was scrambling to execute a new client campaign, Jessica tapped her fingers lightly on the conference table and declared, "We need a senior marketing strategist, urgently." The room went silent for a beat. They all knew when the CEO spoke in that tone, a decision had already been fully formed in her mind. 3 hours later, HR had drafted the job description. A perfect position. Senior marketing strategist. A competitive salary, access to top-tier financial projects, direct communication with the CEO, and most importantly, it matched perfectly with Tessa Morgan's professional profile. Jessica didn't need to search Google or LinkedIn for candidates. She already knew every detail about Tessa, where she worked, her daily habits, the projects she'd led, and most importantly, her hunger to prove herself. In the world of American business, nothing is more enticing than a door that leads to power. And Tessa, a 29-year-old still stuck with the title coordinator, would no doubt run straight toward it without stopping to look at who was holding the handle. 3 days later, Tessa's application appeared in the HR inbox. A polished resume, a cover letter full of confidence, and a hint of urgency. Jessica sat in her glass office, reading each line with a neutral expression. But inside, she felt something unfamiliar. Not jealousy, but curiosity. "Let's play," she whispered, clicking forward to interview panel. Jessica didn't attend the first round of interviews. She understood the art of distance, observing more clearly from afar. Only during the final round, the executive-level evaluation, did she appear, quietly seated behind the one-way mirror in the main conference room. And then Tessa walked in. The woman Andrew had once described as innocent, passionate, and someone who made him feel like himself again, now stood in the center of the room, wearing a cream blazer suit and Louboutin heels, her hair tied low in modern PR style. Tessa smiled softly as she greeted each member of the panel. Her voice was clear, her words well-prepared, her gaze unwavering. Nothing was too obvious, but nothing was innocent either. Jessica watched intently, not to find faults, but to understand her opponent. She wanted to know why Andrew had chosen this woman, and to her surprise, she saw it. Tessa was actually talented. She analyzed markets precisely, proposed fresh ideas, and offered sharp counterpoints. She wasn't just the woman who had intruded into someone's marriage. She was a younger version of Jessica herself, with ambition still unbruised by experience. The interview ended. Everyone agreed. "I want her to start Monday," Jessica said, speaking for the first time after hours of silence. "You sure?" The HR director hesitated. "Isn't that a little fast?" Jessica smiled. "Talented people don't wait, and I want her managing the financial accounts team directly." No one objected. She had taken control from the very first move. That night, Andrew came home with flowers. "Just wanted to thank you for everything," he said, his eyes slightly avoiding hers. Jessica accepted the bouquet, nodded appreciatively as if she knew nothing. But in her mind, she was already laying out the plan for Monday, the day she would shake hands with her husband's mistress under the title of CEO. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to confront, because in chess, the most dangerous move isn't a direct attack. It's when the queen silently changes position. And Jessica Wallace, queen of her own board, had just made her opening move. The first day Tessa Morgan stepped into the headquarters of Wallace Strategies in Manhattan was also the day Jessica Wallace put on her perfect mask. Not to hide the pain, but to stage the most expensive performance of her life. She didn't come down to greet Tessa at the reception desk. She didn't appear at the morning orientation either. Instead, Jessica sat in her glass-walled office on the 27th floor, watching the meetings unfold through the internal security cameras. A quiet general observing the battlefield from afar, knowing every move yet not rushing to act. Tessa was welcomed like any new employee. No judging looks, no cold shoulders. Everything had been orchestrated by Jessica with chilling precision. Because the most effective blow is dealt when your opponent doesn't even realize they're in a war. Jessica's plan wasn't to fire Tessa, nor to humiliate her in front of the office. It was to let Tessa feel for herself the distortion in what seemed like a secret but sweet relationship with Andrew. Jessica didn't need to strike. She only needed to shift the scene and let the people within it reveal themselves. Tessa was assigned to the Anderson account, a major campaign with a 7-figure budget and a tight deadline. It required late nights, constant meetings with the creative team, and direct reports to the CEO, meaning Jessica. She would casually leave handwritten notes on the meeting table mentioning dinner with my husband, or nonchalantly say, my husband and I saw a Broadway show last week. Not too much, just a few threads in the maze, enough to lead the mouse astray. As for Andrew, he still believed he was managing both sides. One was his wife, too busy to notice, the other his mistress, too in love to walk away. He didn't know that both women were slowly seeing through his shadows, but only one of them was quietly drafting a counterplan. Tessa began to change, not obviously, but subtly enough that Jessica noticed. She became quieter in meetings, stopped glancing at her phone under the table. One evening, as Jessica left her office at 9 p.m., she found Tessa still sitting there, eyes staring thoughtfully out at the city window. Need any help? Jessica asked gently. Tessa startled, then quickly shook her head. No, just thinking a bit about content strategy. Remember to rest, Jessica said, pouring her a cup of ginger tea. Work isn't worth trading away your peace. Tessa thanked her, her voice so soft it seemed the wind could carry it away. Thank you, truly. That thank you wasn't just for the tea. Jessica knew. It was a hesitant expression of gratitude from someone beginning to realize the imbalance in the world she was living in. Meanwhile, Andrew grew more irritable. His late nights, his stuck-in-meetings excuses no longer worked when Jessica stopped asking. He realized she no longer checked his phone, no longer questioned him, no longer asked, "How was your day?" That made Andrew uneasy. He had grown used to a Jessica who gave everything to her family, and now, as she grew indifferent, he was beginning to understand what it felt like to be cut out of the equation. One evening, trying to spark a conversation at dinner, Andrew asked, "Do you have any plans for the holiday?" Jessica looked up, smiled faintly. "Thinking of going to Napa by myself. You said it was peaceful and romantic, right?" Andrew froze. Napa, the place he had taken Tessa under the excuse of a company retreat. Jessica didn't emphasize it, didn't repeat it, but she knew that strike had hit precisely at his fear of being exposed. She went back to eating her salmon as if nothing had happened. Inside, she no longer burned with rage. Instead, there was a sharp, icy clarity. When you understand your opponent deeply enough, you don't need to win. You just need to let them fall on their own. Tessa was being pulled further between two worlds, a dream job and a relationship losing its shine. The repeated cancellations, the clipped texts from Andrew, the growing silences, all of it gradually painted a picture no longer colored in rose. And Jessica, the woman once deemed too busy to feel, was now managing not only the betrayal of her husband but also the emotions of the woman who intruded. The game was far from over. But Jessica knew well. The one who writes the rules is never in a hurry. The one who waits longest is the one who can shift the board. And she still had many pieces left unseen. 2 months after Tessa entered the company, the rhythm of the chess game between the three of them began to shift. The artificial calm of their love triangle slowly eroded, like stones worn down by underground water and silence. And Jessica Wallace, the woman who had built that stage, knew it was time to lower the curtain, just slightly. No shock tactics, no confrontation, just a small adjustment, a switch in the travel schedule. Andrew had previously announced he'd be on a 3-day business trip to Phoenix, a familiar location tied to a not-so-innocent past. Jessica, of course, knew it had nothing to do with any actual clients. And as fate would have it, that same week, Tessa had been assigned a business trip, also to Phoenix. A coincidence? Not even close. Everything had been orchestrated by Jessica 3 weeks earlier, when she tweaked the client schedules just enough so the two of them would have a chance to reunite. But on the night before departure, Jessica called Tessa into her office, right when the younger woman was finalizing slides for the trip. "I need to make a change to tomorrow's plan," Jessica said, her voice as light and cold as a breeze. Tessa paused slightly, but quickly regained her composure. "Of course. What needs to be adjusted? I'll be going to Phoenix instead of you. You'll stay behind and handle the Miller presentation Tuesday morning. I trust you can manage it." 1 second. 2. In that brief moment, Jessica clearly saw the flicker of panic in Tessa's eyes before it was replaced by a perfectly professional mask. "Understood. Thank you for the confidence." As soon as she left the office, Tessa pulled out her phone. Jessica didn't need to guess. While still seated at her desk, a ping came from the iCloud tracking system. The message appeared. "Tessa, I can't go to Phoenix anymore. She's taking my place." Andrew, "What? Are you sure she's not suspicious?" Jessica smiled, not out of satisfaction, but because things were progressing on schedule. She didn't need to show a single emotion, because they were creating those feelings for each other. Feelings of powerlessness, frustration, entrapment. That evening, Andrew came home, poured some wine, and sat beside her. "Bad news. The Phoenix conference got postponed. I'm not going anymore." Jessica nodded, took a sip. "Oh, what a coincidence. I have to go instead, covering for a new employee." Andrew froze. "Tessa?" Jessica didn't answer directly. She just shrugged, eyes still on her wine glass. "Anyway, we need someone who can manage situations better." He forced a laugh, but Jessica knew that laugh had no foundation. Tessa wasn't having an easier time either. Every time she looked at her phone, every time she got a brief message from Andrew saying, "Busy, talk later," she tensed up a little more. The early excitement, the secret texts, the sneaky nights, now seemed to be wearing down the special feeling she once thought she had. Jessica didn't need to feel jealous. She just needed to pull Tessa closer to the reality she herself had lived for over a decade. That man wasn't worth the bet of trust. And then came the moment Jessica skillfully introduced Tessa to Andrew's world. She hosted a small private dinner in a Tribeca restaurant to welcome a group of financial clients. Naturally, Tessa was invited as the new department head. And the guests that night? 3 longtime colleagues of Andrew, the very ones who had attended conferences with him and once covered up his disappearances under the excuse of family obligations. Jessica observed their expressions as they recognized Tessa. One nodded politely, another hesitated during a handshake, and one blinked like he'd seen a ghost from a fling best left forgotten. Tessa sensed it. After the dinner, she quietly approached Jessica. "Those men, they used to work with your husband, didn't they?" Jessica showed no surprise. "Yes. In finance, everyone knows everyone." "Oh." Tessa fell silent. The awkwardness crept in like a crack beginning to spread. She didn't need Jessica to say anything more. Tessa could feel it herself. She was no longer in the dark. Light had begun to shine, and it wasn't as gentle as those early dates. That was what Jessica wanted. Not revenge, but for everyone to face the reflection of their choices in the mirror. And then, when they realized the mirror was cracking, Jessica would be the one standing outside, calmly adjusting her tie and saying softly, "Don't blame the mirror, blame the reflection." The game wasn't over, but for Jessica, the board had already started to tilt. Jessica Wallace never believed in the concept of winning in silence, like people often preach on social media. As someone living in the heart of Manhattan, she understood clearly. In a world of power and deception, silence is just a step back to gain momentum for a counterattack. And after 3 months of steering everything in the right direction, Jessica knew it was time to play her main card. Her 15-year marriage had become an empty contract. Half-hearted hugs, repeated conversations, glances that avoided rather than confronted. But Jessica didn't want to be someone who simply quietly walked away. She wanted to end it with initiative, transparency, and unmistakable clarity. She started with something very simple: the law. No divorce could be fair if the woman didn't hold the core assets. And Jessica, as the CEO of Wallace Strategies, had planned ahead. She had moved most of her personal assets and company shares into investments under legal entities, entirely lawful. She had transferred property ownership to the parent company under the guise of business expansion. And most importantly, she had hired one of the sharpest divorce attorneys in New York, with one condition: no need to move fast. I need to strike at the right moment. Meanwhile, Andrew remained clueless. After the Phoenix incident, he became more cautious, or rather fearful. Jessica still cooked, still smiled, still occasionally mentioned, "A client praised you today." This peaceful calm only made Andrew more anxious. No one stays that composed unless they're preparing for a storm. And then came Meridian Financial's year-end party, where Andrew worked. It wasn't an event Jessica particularly liked, but this year she offered to attend with him. "I want to support your work. It's been a while since we appeared together at a function," she said, straightening his suit collar in front of the mirror. Andrew nodded, but Jessica noticed the sweat forming on his neck. Tessa would be there that night, as the marketing representative from her company. A coincidence? Number A perfectly orchestrated setup. At the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the space glowed gold, champagne overflowed glasses, and artificial relationships were dressed up with handshakes. Jessica appeared with Andrew, in a black velvet backless gown, hair in an elegant updo, her gaze proud and serene. No one would have guessed that this woman was about to rewrite the terms of her relationship, all in one night. She didn't look for Tessa. She knew Tessa was there, standing just a few meters away, quiet but uneasy, her eyes flitting to Andrew and freezing when she saw Jessica on his arm. And then the moment came. The CEO of Meridian stepped onto the stage to speak. After a few thank you remarks, he said something unexpected. "Before we conclude, I'd like to invite someone who had a major influence on our strategy this year, the CEO of Wallace Strategies, Mrs. Jessica Wallace, to say a few words." Andrew froze. Jessica stepped up to the podium to a mixture of applause and curiosity. She offered a modest smile, kept her eyes focused toward the lights, and calmly began, "I'm very grateful for the partnership between our two companies. But tonight I don't just want to talk about business strategy. I want to talk about life strategy, about transparency, about the value of loyalty." She paused, letting the room fall silent. Tessa stared. Andrew looked down, clutching his wine glass. Jessica continued, "This past year, I've learned that silence doesn't mean ignorance, and dedication doesn't mean blindness. I'm not standing here to blame anyone, but to announce that, starting tomorrow, I will step away from the role of wife." The entire ballroom went quiet. Andrew stood up, as if trying to stop something, but Jessica had already turned away. "Don't worry," she said as she passed him, not stopping. "I've signed everything. The papers are in the safe. You'll find them in the morning." And with that, she left the stage, walked past the stunned gazes, past Tessa, who couldn't utter a word, and exited the party without looking back. That night, in a taxi heading home alone, Jessica looked at her phone screen. A message from her lawyer. "The divorce papers have been processed. Your assets are secure." She leaned back, closed her eyes, and exhaled deeply. Not out of sorrow, but because the fight was over, and she was the one who had closed every door, yet still held the key to her future. Tomorrow the world would know. Jessica Wallace wasn't abandoned. She let go. And that was something entirely different. After that party, the echo didn't come from the awkward applause or the whispers over champagne. It came from the silences, long, heavy, and unerasable, where three people had to face the truth. Everything had gone too far to turn back. The next morning, in the penthouse that had once been their shared home, Andrew walked into the study and saw the divorce papers neatly placed on the desk. A sleek black Mont Blanc pen lay beside them, like a final exclamation mark. Everything Jessica had ever said, ever implied, was now an undeniable reality. And then it was Tessa's turn. On the Monday morning after the gala, Tessa arrived at the office earlier than usual. She walked into the building in a charcoal gray suit, her gaze heavy. The eagerness from her first day was gone, as was the fiery energy of someone who had just been chosen. In its place stood a woman beginning to understand the complexity of trust and the cost of becoming the special one in a mistaken story. On her desk was a thin envelope. It had been delivered by Jessica's personal assistant. She said, "There's no rush to respond. Just read it." Inside was an appointment letter for the new director position at Wallace Strategies' London branch. A major promotion? higher pay, premium benefits, and most importantly, complete separation from Andrew and the memories of New York. Tessa read every line, her hands slightly trembling. At the bottom was that familiar blue ink signature, Jessica Wallace. No post-it note, no warning, just an offer to open or close every door. That afternoon, she knocked on the CEO's office door. Jessica was signing documents. Without looking up, she said, "It's not locked." Tessa stepped in. Her eyes wavered, her voice soft. "You might not believe me, but I didn't know you were his wife. Not at all." Jessica looked up, not angry, not sarcastic, only the calm of someone who had moved past the need to hear apologies. "I believe you," she said slowly, "but belief doesn't equal forgiveness." Tessa nodded. No excuses, no tears. Jessica continued, "I used to be the kind of woman who thought that love, sacrifice, and patience were enough to hold a marriage together. You know what? I was wrong, and he wasn't worth either of us hurting ourselves like that." Tessa clenched her hands, looking down. "I didn't think it would turn out like this. I just thought I was being loved. Number, you were being used. And now you have two choices. Keep living in regret, or use this mistake as the reason to grow." Jessica stood up, poured 2 cups of Earl Grey. She handed one to Tessa, her gaze still calm. "I don't hate you. I just feel sorry for both of us. But I don't live in regret. And I don't think you should either." Jessica's composure made Tessa cry. Not the tears of a woman heartbroken, but the tears of someone seeing her true self in the mirror for the first time. 3 weeks later, Tessa left for London. No goodbyes. None were needed. Jessica stood in her office looking down at Madison Avenue. She wasn't happy. She wasn't sad. But one thing was certain. Nothing bound her to the past anymore. She didn't need to defeat Tessa, didn't need to teach Andrew a lesson, because the one who stands firm in the end isn't the one who wins the argument. It's the one who knows when to let go and move forward. That afternoon, her phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. "Thank you for not destroying me. I won't waste this chance. T." Jessica didn't reply. Some endings need no response. Some lessons are written in blood, both for the ones who caused the pain and the ones who endured it. In the long game called marriage and betrayal, she wasn't just the survivor. She was the one who rewrote the rules. 6 months after signing the divorce papers, on an early autumn morning in Manhattan, Jessica Wallace sat in her new office on the 32nd floor of the Glass Point building, gazing through the glass window at Central Park, cloaked in shades of yellow and orange. The coffee in her hand had gone cold, but her heart was warm, a warmth that didn't come from someone beside her, but from a sense of trust no longer shared with a betrayer. She used to think of marriage as a long-term investment. 15 years with Andrew had meant sharing everything, from dinners to financial plans, from sleepless nights to signing their first contracts. But in the end, what kept her standing wasn't that relationship. It was herself, the woman who hadn't lost her identity in the process of building it all. After a divorce that stirred buzz across the finance industry, many assumed Jessica would go into hiding, retreat to a quiet life, or take a few months off to recover. But she didn't take a break. She didn't need one, because the wound had begun to heal long before the papers were signed. When she dared to face the truth, dared to fight, and dared to end it with the dignity of someone who still had self-respect. Wallace Strategies not only remained intact after the upheaval, it thrived. 3 new international branches were launched in just the first quarter of the year. She signed a deal with Heston Capital in Singapore, paving the way for financial consulting to expand into Asia. And the London office, led by Tessa Morgan, exceeded its revenue targets 3 quarters in a row. Jessica didn't need forgiveness to move forward, but she also didn't carry hatred. The only thing she cultivated was a life fully under her control. From time to time, Andrew's old acquaintances still texted her, part admiration, part attempt to reconnect. But Jessica never looked back. Not out of bitterness, but because the road ahead was far too vast to waste time glancing toward a collapsed path. One evening, under a light rain, at a networking event for investors at the Langham Hotel, Jessica entered the grand hall with the presence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Her cobalt blue dress stood out among the sea of gray suits, her heels echoing with crisp resolve. She didn't need anyone beside her because her independence had become the light that guided her. At the bar, a silver-haired man turned and clinked glasses with her. Jessica Wallace, right? I'm Alexander Harrington, Blackwell Partners. Pleasure to meet you. I've heard quite a bit about how you handle complex situations, he smiled. Jessica smiled back. I don't believe in complexity. I believe in clarity and the right strategy at the right time. They talked like equals. No courting, no caution. Just mutual respect between people who knew their own worth. When Alexander invited her to a private dinner to hear more about her management philosophy, Jessica didn't decline. But she wasn't in a rush either. I'll consider it. Depends on whether that dinner's about business strategy or another kind of game, she said with a light smile. That night, back home, Jessica stood in front of the mirror, removing the last pair of earrings from her ears. In her eyes was a woman who was no longer anyone's shadow, no longer someone's wife, no longer the cold CEO, but a whole person with a past neatly resolved and a future being rewritten. Her phone vibrated. A message from Tessa in London. The new office is complete. The team's amazing. I never thought I could start over, but thank you for not burying me. I won't let you down. Jessica set the phone down on the table. She didn't reply. No need. Some thanks are best kept in silence, because silence is sometimes not an absence, but the most complete declaration of grace and human depth. The Manhattan air was turning cold, but Jessica knew from now on she'd never need to stay warm through someone else's love. She had a life wholly owned by her own hands, and that was the most beautiful definition of revenge. No explosions, just success,